So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. So we have people from different countries. Some people are joining late from they are right now. So today we're gonna have the webinar implementing a PMO using lean concepts. And we have distinguished Guy Wolf. Guy, he's an experimented PMO and project manager. So have very interesting things to tell us about the experience in using lean concepts to implement a project management office. So that information can help you to do some continuous improvement in your PMO if you have an existing one. So some of the highlights of Mr. Wolf. So you can see his LinkedIn profile. He has been working in several IT transformation projects. So he's talking about revenue between 15 to $30 million. He has been a CIO, Chief Information Officer for some organization. He has been managing budgets around 30 million annual budget. So he's gonna educate us in these concepts of using lean in the PMO space. With that being said, so we're gonna leave a guide to if you wanna highlight some of your experience with the group. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Just a short story to start. What got me into being a project management office leader. About 20 years ago, I was working as a site director, 12 different sites for a healthcare delivery organization in California, 12 hospitals. And I was complaining to the chief information officer that we have a hard time making our projects work and selecting them and in executing them well. His solution to that was to appoint me the PMO director for IT for that hospital, for the hospitals. And since then, I haven't done that exclusively, but it's been exhilarating when I've had a chance to do it, I gotta say. So I'm on my 6th right now, interspersed with some other projects. And the last one that I was part of started about 2 years ago, and introduced the concept of using lean principles to implement that. So I'm free to go ahead and walk through our lessons learned. Tony, just a favor if I could ask from you, as people are using the chat to put questions in or comments, if you think it's important to interrupt, please do so.
Yeah,
because someone might need me to go back and explain something.
Agree.
All right. So agenda, the topic as introduced, the lean principles we use to implement a project management office. Relevance is to anyone who's considering implementing one or is in the process of implementing a project management office, or considering making targeted improvements to one that already exists. The agenda that will follow, a brief overview of the organization and the project management environment that we were in, what we found, what things needed to be improved, how we employed lean principles, and then some results from that. And then a few key takeaways, at least that I found valuable in my first lean implementation. And ultimately what prompted all this is Dr. Prenza wrote an article about lean thinking in project management offices. And I was excited to read that and read through it. I corresponded with him and said, I just got done doing one of those. So I appreciate the invitation, and hopefully this is something that people will get some value from and be able to apply to specific instances in your environment. So a little bit about the background. The organization is a $190 million medical imaging company solely focused on images, so very data intensive. We had in-house 8 to 10, and sometimes even more than that, full-time project managers. And they consisted in two groups, one in the enterprise or operations side, plus about half of those in the IT department. The PMOs, or there was one PMO, and that was on the operations side. We did not have the IT project management office, which is the subject of this discussion. But the focus in that project management office was 100% on project delivery. So not much in the governing and intake of projects or project selection, and not in the resource management or the overview of the portfolio, but really focused on, once we had a project, executing that project all the way through the go live. So it was, I would say, a limited scope PMO. We did get feedback. Senior leadership view was an urgent need to improve both the quality and the timeliness of project selection and delivery. There weren't specific measures around that. So one of our first tasks is to understand, what are the measures? How do you gauge quality and timeliness of project selection and delivery? What we were able to do was to invite in a consulting organization. This was a company, the name of the company is Moss Adams, that had previous experience in implementing lean process improvements. So we learned a lot about the methodology, the lean methodology, and were immediately able to apply that to this. We created a cross-department leadership team, and with that and that included people in finance, HR, operations heavily, and a significant portion from information technology. What we found through this, and we'll focus in on some of these in more detail, but at the top was in intake, that we weren't getting thorough data about what the project envisioned. The end users could contact IT through a variety of means. There wasn't a formal way to track any project that was submitted. We still executed on projects, but did not have the ability to say who has submitted what and what level of endorsement. Second, we did not have an integrated or unified portfolio. So no single source of truth to identify what projects that we're looking at. And then we did not have consistent information about the projects. Certain things you'd always have, like start and finish, project manager, but other key data elements like what are the expected outcomes of the project, budget, that was inconsistent. There was no formal governance to the project. So what governance there was highly IT driven. So the IT department leads, working across aisles to the operations, but we did not have a true alignment to strategic priorities that we could point to. Also, without the portfolio, it was hard to evaluate what the potential impacts would be to other projects if one is delayed or new project priorities are set. And finally, no way to really validate that the hoped for benefits, why we're pursuing a certain project, no way to validate if they were realized or not at the conclusion. Similar in resource management, there was not an ability to view all of our resource allocations to projects, both existing ones as well as pending ones, where we could look at key disciplines such as database administration, desktop support, network, etc., and be able to balance those across the portfolio. And of course, that limited our ability to plan resource assignments given the incidents requests, keep the lights on type maintenance, and then any projects obviously that come in on top of that. And then finally, project performance. We did not have universal standards across projects where every project needs a charter or weekly status reports required. So that was something that we needed to put in place. And I think all of you, if you've been working in this environment, can look at those 5 dimensions of a PMO. The top 3 really about, are we selecting the right projects? And the last 4 and 5 there, are we doing the projects right? And so our mantra was, do the right projects and do projects right. So in terms of lean principles, we did get an education at the outset. Again,
sorry, guys. So a quick question: when you mentioned do the right projects, do you have any parameter in place to decide what are those projects for the organization?
At the outset, the projects that were assigned, well, they came in a couple of ways. One is the senior leaders would confer at the executive leadership team and say, here are the projects at that level that we need to conduct this year. So we did get some very good top-down guidance on what the strategic initiatives would be.
Okay.
In the spaces around those, though, there are always day-to-day projects. Maybe day-to-day isn't quite accurate, but month-to-month, where new opportunities arise that don't percolate up so much to the CEO level, but are vital for an organization to survive. And so the process for that is where we really struggled, because we didn't have a way to evaluate a project and on its own merits, and more importantly, to evaluate it against all the other opportunities that an organization can take on.
Okay.
So did that address what you were looking for there, or whoever was?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. All right, so a quick tour around these. A caveat to this: I am not lean formally trained or certified at any level. However, I will say that having that background and having it on our team was vital, especially when it came to the terminology, the vocabulary that we use to communicate with one another. And just some examples here. We developed some catchphrases. One of those is rapid prototyping. Get something out right away and as a prototype and adjust for that. And we'll get into some specifics when we do the intake process. The second, I had only ever heard MVP as most valuable player, but within a few weeks, MVP was pretty well known in the organization as the minimum viable product. And that is what you can get by with at the minimum and the soonest, because anything that you get will be adjusted as you improve and you learn. So MVP became a key word when we were looking at a new process, getting it out there, just getting to the MVP. And it also was used throughout what are the minimum viable contents of an individual's project plan for a specific project. Another one, and this one we really got some help because of the organization's culture, and that is to fail fast. And people need safety, psychological safety, to be able to adopt that kind of an approach. And really what it means is knowing that we will get errors, that we will have feedback, and to welcome the mistakes as learning opportunities to go back and improve. Reducing waste. A lot of business processes are done out of habit more than they are considered business value. And this, looking at each of our processes and trying to eliminate waste from them became a new ethic for us in that approach. And that happened at every step along the way, from design through test through implementation. And then finally, learn and improve. And this one, there's in Lean, I think the last one is called Seek Perfection. We intentionally moved away from that term to learn and improve, because the attitude of seeking perfection actually can inhibit people from doing everything else, getting something out quick, failing fast, and getting value early. The seeking perfection can freeze people until they get something absolutely perfect before it's useful. Another technique that we picked up and called the pick chart. And if you look at the lower left here, on the x-axis, it's a method to qualify, at least subjectively, what initiatives you want to take on. So some initiatives could be of low difficulty, but also on the y-axis have a low payoff. And going around this, so we would do those are possible to do. And a potential early win, if you will, as we're rolling out new processes. And one of these that came up was an idea that we should assign the qualified project manager prior to the start of the project. So rather than beginning work and eventually getting a project manager assigned, get them up front. Wasn't hard to do, didn't really move the needle a lot, but it did get some momentum on process change. The next area called implement on this.
Hold on a second. Yeah, I see. Everybody can see the screen because I see the message. They say we cannot see the screen again. Everybody can see the screen?
Let me try.
Huh?
I can see it
I
fine.
can see.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, apparently it's something specific.
Okay,
well, thank you.
Yeah, and Dr. Prenz, I'll forward the documents so you can post for people who want to download these. So in the upper left quadrant, these are things that are not very hard, but have a high payoff. Two of those shown here, creating a single company portfolio view of all of our projects, and then also the project request or intake process. And those are the ones that get the I for implement, do those right away. The third letter in here, the C, these are challenging things. They have a high payoff potentially, but they're also difficult to do. And certainly for demand and capacity measurements, that required a heavy lift in terms of getting all the right disciplines identified, and then using a resource management tool within the project management tool that we selected and integrating that with the portfolio. So those were pushed out a little bit more. And then it's often called kill. We used kibosh. And that's an idea that sounds good, but it'd be really hard to implement and would require and would deliver only a low payoff. One of the ones that I was a little surprised is that we pushed off not including the non-IT project management office and the PMs. However, it was not effort wasted, because the process that we went through, it had a smaller scope, and we were able to be more agile in making adjustments to it. And as it matured, that it was a process that could be scaled up. So drilling down here, and a specific example, our rapid prototype number 1 was to address the quality and timeliness of our project intake process. And we had an objective to make it a process that meets the business need for both timely review and a decision, meaning it had the qualities in it that allowed management to decide about that project. Several intake elements, and we did this as we were going through that defining value and mapping value steps in the lean process. A single input. We wanted to eliminate the emails, the chats, the hallway conversations as methods of originating projects, not to close off the discussion and the ideation that goes around creating project, but not assuming that because someone sent an email, then that's a project request. So we put some formality around that. We also wanted to see transparency, that once a request is made, it can be viewed by everyone who may need access to that. Also a way to guarantee that we had leadership endorsement. And in this case, we wanted both a sponsor who's in the business who's going to be responsible for that project, as well as that department vice president. This can help us get to, is this a valuable project to undertake, or is it just somebody's idea, but there's not a leadership endorsement? And then finally, but not last, we wanted to make sure that we had a review process and a decision in a timely fashion. And I remember one of our messages from the customers was, don't leave us hanging. The idea that project requests can go in and go into a black hole. We wanted to get the workflow right and the visibility right, so that all the time we're looking at these open requests and taking whatever that next step needs to be. So some results of that, we used a tool called Smartsheet, and many of you may be familiar with that. They have some templates. We used the PMO template. It was mostly out of the box. However, it does require some customization because it has generic names and generic departments, and there is some workflow capability in it that's easy to tweak for the organization that you're supporting. From the design phase, where we're mapping the value stream, creating the flow, through building, testing, we did a pilot. I certainly would encourage this. We selected a department that had a long track record of being early adopters and a psychological set that conformed to those other values like fail fast, learn continuously. And so we used that department for several of the piloting that we did. And then publish and begin operation. That whole cycle was about 4 weeks long, from the time we said, let's start this, until we actually had something that was in production. And so that, not that it didn't change after that, but getting that minimum viable product out for our users in that time frame was certainly an early win. Results from that, we did get high adoption. I wish I could relate to you an exact percentage, but we did not measure that precisely. But I would say that we were 4 out of 5 that adopted that for their new projects. And the ones that didn't, we steered back into it. The second result, all requests are visible. They have the same attributes because they followed that process. And so everyone along the way that needs to evaluate the request was able to see what was needed. And then it improved our submit to decide timeliness from, we didn't measure it, but anecdotal reports are several weeks in some cases, to 8.5 days. And so, with the automation comes the ability to track some of that. So what this graph shows is in terms of elapsed time in days, from the blue is from the moment it was submitted until the sponsor said okay to move it on or declined it. And that was at about 1.25 days. The next level in that workflow was the vice president for the department that the sponsor represents. And you can see that was nearly instantaneous, on average, less than a day. And then the time that was within the IT governance group that looks at these, it's slightly under a week in calendar days. So from start to finish, we were having a decision delivered within 8.5 days. So changing gears a bit here, eliminating waste, or MUDA, if I'm pronouncing that correctly in the Japanese. We did get some good training about what are the most common wastes in a process. And I will say that most of the literature that I've read, at least on this, is highly organized around manufacturing companies. It comes out of, the Toyota originated this, I believe. But there are elements that are sure adaptable to a service organization. Two in particular that come to mind that we came across were over-processing, that is, adding more automation where it's not needed, and then defects, a defective product that requires rework or starting all over again. And getting into those. So an example of over-processing, we have with that tool, the smart sheet or any of the project management tools, there's great potential for making anything automated. And one idea we experimented with was to get people to update their tasks in the project. After the project plan had been created, people were assigned tasks. You could see that very visible. And there's the capability that says if a task is due within X days and it's not in complete status, send an email to the assignee. It wasn't hard to create that kind of automation. In practice, though, we added it only selectively to certain projects. And the reason is that it was just too much email. And we were losing the signal because of all the noise of emails. And truthfully, the people who would respond to the emails were the same people who didn't need the email reminders. So that was an example of where we had an idea, it turned out to be over processing. We realized it almost immediately and then only used it on select projects at the project manager's discretion. Defects was another one, and that certainly relates to our project business case. When we rolled out the intake, emphasized in this that we were really focused on doing things more quickly, the timeliness and quality. We could measure that timeliness. What we weren't paying as close attention to when the initial business cases came in is the thoroughness of those business cases. As a result, there was a high degree of rework, and that is interaction with the requester, more than we anticipated, to finally get a business case that a governing body can make a judgment on. And so looking at our couple other views of IT governance, when we looked at the past, of 114 projects that came in, about 70% of those were green lighted and added to the portfolio. Some in a waiting state, meaning to be scheduled based on the resource constraints that we had or other priority projects that needed to go in front of it. Another 25% were either declined or canceled or just not endorsed. the other 5% were in awaiting review or another in process. So what we saw on that, I'm not sure if 70% versus 25% is the right number, but we did have at least a measurable way to say these projects are getting rejected, and then examining why were those projects being rejected. The other process that we were able to eliminate was that shadow request process. If there was a habit of contacting someone in IT to get a project on the board, by having a portfolio of pending projects, we were able to create visibility around that and get that retracked into our process. And then it reinforced the standards for what's a project request versus what's an incident or a standard service request. So we were able to simplify for the organization what are the avenues to engage IT for services. And so that helped across the board there. The other identification that we saw was in the thoroughness of the business case. As this graph shows, when we started out, a few of the projects had measurable costs and benefits proposed as what the expectation of what's the business value of this project. Another 15% or so had cost data only, but the vast majority had no metric, neither cost nor benefit. Over the course of a little under a year, what we were emphasizing then was to improve the numbers of projects coming in that had both the costs and benefits. And you can see we've made progress, but it's not 100% by any means. And then the other improvement opportunity we identified was on the adoption side, making sure that the projects are getting through the intake and not bypassing that process. So there is some level of policing that needs to go on in any kind of process, and that was certainly noticed in this one. So after a year, or within the year, we started looking at what our project timeliness was. And you recall in that earlier one where we were 8.5 days from start to finish, with the emphasis that was placed on the quality side of the equation. You can see the expansion and the amount of time from someone submitting a project to a sponsor endorsement, and then a much larger increase in the time from the sponsor's endorsement through the vice president's endorsement to go to the IT steering committee. And although, yes, it does absolutely, it increases the entire elapsed time by a few days, but that was certainly a reasonable cost to get the improved oversight of those business cases that the sponsors and VPs were demanding. All right, so I think we'll certainly have time for some question and answer. Key takeaways that I would say that at least we got, and at least I have, I'll speak for myself. Tools and methodologies are useful only to the extent they support people who add value. People deliver service and use tools. And what we found is that if creating a tool that is not used is one of the biggest wastes that we can encounter in this process. So whether it's a Excel or SharePoint or Smartsheet, it's focusing on the processes that are truly going to add value and be adopted. The second is the lean concepts and terminology that we were educated on. I would say the education was worthwhile because the practice of those spread far beyond the IT PMO or the scope of what it was intended for. And by that, I mean, when we would have issues at go live and a resolution was offered, even in the business, they started talking about what's the MVP, what's the minimum viable product to get a user back functioning again, and then come back later with a more thorough resolution. It's not a new concept, but having that same language helped us communicate quite a bit. The third is to experiment. Some measures work real well and some don't. Some processes work well and don't. And the only way to tell often is to try them. I mentioned the one that we did with the early notice to a task coming due, an email, and that was an experiment that taught us that it can create more noise than it does actual improvement in process. And then finally, measure what's valuable and not what's convenient. And sometimes the measurement isn't all that technical. One of the key measures we started early on to measure project status was simply the last status update on the project. What we found is that projects that had longer than 1 week since they've updated a status, those projects usually were the ones that were having some difficulty. And it's just a human tendency that if something's hard or you're not sure what to do about it, then rather than communicating a need for help, there is no communication at all. And some would, said, well, so all I have to do is change a letter and, now it's updated and it's current. And that's true. But in practice, project managers just aren't, for the most part, just aren't that way. They're diligent. And if they're going to update a project, they're going to really put an updated status in there. But it was a valuable metric. And I would say, I'm a believer in Goodhart's law, who says that when a measure becomes a target, then it ceases to be a good measure, because it'll create perverse behaviors. But it's not been our experience with that. And it did really help us on identification. So those were the 4 takeaways that I wanted to emphasize here. And certainly if there's questions that have come up in the meantime,
Right.
Dr. Prince is open to do those.
Yeah, I have one question from Sarah. She asking, can you explain how can work on the alignment of corporate strategies with the project decision making?
How did we align corporate strategies with the appropriate decision?
Yeah, so basically in the areas of establishing governance for decision making.
Right. Good question. I don't recall the exact pillars, but we had 4 or 5 strategic drivers, and probably most organizations have this, like grow the business, financial stewardship, improve customer relationships or customer service. We had a series of those, and those were part of the request and an expectation that any project that would be submitted, and we built this into the workflow, would access one or more or advance one or more of those. And those are subjective. There's not a hard metric around it. The other part was, and as you can see in that earlier graph, we were growing in that capability. What are the specific measurable deliverables that this project is intended to deliver? It could be more unique visitors to the website, which it may not directly translate to an ROI, but it is a measurable impact, and you can say, did the project achieve that or not? And so in terms of helping governance, that's the imperatives, and then the measurable expected benefits were the 2 areas.
Perfect. Thank
Anyone
you.
has other
Sure,
questions?
sir.
Take advantage that we have. Okay, here. Anyone has any other question?
I would like to have a quick question, please.
Yeah. Go
Hey,
ahead.
Mohammed.
So you thank you first for the presentation and the case study. That's something really appreciated. But how can you imagine to take those takeaways and implement it in other industries? So this one was majorly for the IT one, and all those MVPs can be applied really for the IT part. But for example, can we take it for the construction PMO or the oil and gas PMO, which MPVs, it's not really, or MVPs, sorry, it's not really something that can be achieved in that regarding.
Yeah, Mohammed, I appreciate that, because you're absolutely right. There is some flexibility or elasticity to information technology products, where you can deliver a bare bones entry level and then build from that, where that may not, certainly isn't as translatable if you're creating a new a highway or some other physical structure, right? You can't do 10% of the Empire State Building and say, let's start living in the first 10%. So those aren't directly translatable in terms of the concept of the MVP. What I would say, though, is, and we did this because if you read the literature in Lean, you get the feeling that you're sitting in the middle of an assembly line at Toyota. That was my impression. I'm sure authors have created more service-oriented type literature, but finding the design principles or the process principles that you can apply in your situation, as I just went through, that's where the value is. And it's not like you have to change everything in your organization to be 100% lean compliant, what's black belt level, but to take advantage of all the thought and training that's gone in on a lot of people's parts, and take those principles back to what you can do in your environment. Hopefully that answers. It's not a perfect answer, I realize, but hopefully that's helpful.
It is indeed, and thank you for sharing that. And as you just said, not all skills or ways can be transferable. So we can take away what can be done in that case or not. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, now you just triggered one of the ones on the wastes is inventory. And you say, well, it doesn't matter if we've got 3 projects in inventory or 3,000. They don't take up any really materially any more space, as opposed to engines in an assembly line. But the concept of not having anything sitting along the process, work in process, that there's always a push or a pull, better, a pull to move that along. Designing that into our process was something we did consider.
Yeah, I have another question from Ronald. He asking if this approach can be applied to predictive projects, waterfall projects. Mainly, you talk about MVPs, some kind of agile project. So I can say that the concepts of lean can be applicable to any kind of project management approach. So it's like you telling also the industry that you want to apply. So the concepts are basically the same. So when you need to customize what is specific in your industry or your work method. So Do you have any experience in the predictive approach implementing lean concepts?
And excuse me, I didn't hear the term. Which approach?
Predictive or waterfall. In the waterfall approach, do you have any experience implementing lean concepts there?
Oh, in a pure waterfall where you go from a design to, I think that we've had several waterfall projects where there is a absolute, inviolable target go live date. And prior to that, there are some other predecessor dates. So you can actually, map those out, calculate the critical path, et cetera. Where I've found the lean concepts helpful in this client as well as others is inside of those tasks. If you think of those tasks at the summary level, like develop the user interface for a certain solution. Inside of that, you can have multiple iterations, understanding that overall everything has to be done in a certain time. The lean concept can help you get there by early experimentation, all within that time frame. So I don't think that it's an either or. There are capabilities or preferences that help in a hybrid situation where it's an overall waterfall project, but individual teams can use lean methods to get their work product done on time.
Right. So I have another question from Ted, and he's asking, how will you approach an implementation for a customer organization that believes they already have the high-performing PMO? So some kind of resistant to change.
Yeah, it's Ted. Okay. It's hard to sell something to somebody who doesn't believe they have the need. And people go through, I remember you can be in different buying modes. Someone who's overconfident that they think they already know we're far beyond any need. They're not a good prospect for a solution because they don't see a problem. Or they're at even keel, everything's going okay, we'll call you if we need something. The areas that I've only seen adopt dramatically different processes are, we're in trouble, we're way behind, we're out of compliance, we're losing money, we got to do something. Or that there's a big new opportunity, but we can't get to there unless we radically change. So if they're not in one of those two modes, I would find it incredibly difficult to try to persuade someone through a major process change.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say in situations like that, we always have opportunity to improve, but doing some benchmarking. So if you are competing in your industry with other organizations, find someone that is doing it and see some advantage. So usually the one that is ahead, or the different approaches or the different technologies that we have out there, so they're gonna be ahead of you. If you wanna keep the status quo, so don't do anything. But if you wanna catch, in this world, so we have a lot of competition. So one day you're gonna be out of the market because somebody else gonna take your place. So I would say benchmarking is a good thing to do in situations like that, so you can demonstrate. So my neighbor, they are doing this and they are in this position because of that. So that's something that you can approach.
Yeah, and if I could have another bite at that apple, I think one of the things that the lean concepts, that mindset, is never being satisfied. You can be happy with progress, but there's always something else. And so that kind of mindset keeps people from getting too even keel or overconfident wherever they are.
Right. So I'm gonna put my email in the chat. So if you want to have access to the documents, send me an email. So I would be more than happy to share it with you. And the recordings, I'm gonna post this in YouTube and post this in LinkedIn so everybody can see it.
Well, Dr. Prenza, let me just say thank you again for the opportunity. It was really a chance meeting over LinkedIn and email, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity to share what we learned.
Yeah, so I appreciate your time. It was a great presentation, very useful about your experience that you were sharing with us. I hope that this information help people attending here or people that are gonna be watching the video to do something. So the world never stops, so we can't stop. So it's a ever-changing world, so we need to adopt different methods, different things of doing things because we require to do it. I share the LinkedIn profile from Guy if you want to approach him individually. So do it by LinkedIn or me. So we are here to serve. And thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to be with us today.
All right. I'll wave bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.